The cultural destruction of Africa is actually an African fashion legacy. Countless thousands of years ago, African people left a legacy of textiles and jewelry, while Europeans looked at fashion as little more than protective covering. And from ancient times to the modern day, you're going to see the answers to the following questions. Number one, what did the ancient Egyptians and the Moors bring to the world which brought Europe out of the dark, or we'll call them white ages? Number two, what have been the sources of European fashion inspiration? Number three, what type of fashion evolved from a people who were stripped from their land and forced into slavery? And number four, why are most fashion shows geared strictly for entertainment without giving any information on history? And you'll be able to see that fashion, that which was once sacred to African people, has been plagiarized, plundered, and yes, even desecrated. Now, civilization began in Africa, and if you don't believe me, you can consult all the latest anthropological studies. So we were the first to use fashion. We painted our bodies and used shells and stones for adornment, and when civilization reached its zenith in a land called Kemet, known as Egypt today, we dressed our gods and goddesses according to the attributes that they possess. And here you have the great god Asuru, offspring of heaven and earth, Nut and Geb, wearing a shroud and seated on the throne because he was ruler of the spiritual realm. And with him is his wife, Aset, or Isis as she was called by the Greeks, and on her head is a throne because, sisters, in order for him to rule, he had to come through her to sit on the throne, thus showing the balance between the African male and the African female. The ancient Egyptians said the goddess Aset brought fashion and weaving to the banks of the Nile. And cloth itself was something considered sacred, considered worthy of the gods. And so in her tomb in the Valley of the Queens, we find Nefertari offering the linen cloth to the god Ptah. Now, Ptah was the creator god, and he's dressed in a shroud. And on his shroud is an X, because it's showing that he's in the spiritual realm. And the X indicates resurrection in the spiritual realm. So long before Spike Lee popularized the X and made it something that anybody felt comfortable in wearing, the X was the symbol of African people countless thousands of years ago. And behind him is the Jed pillar, indicating stability. It looks like kente cloth, doesn't it? Also showing the colors of red, black, green, and gold were the colors of African people countless thousands of years ago. And on the papyruses throughout Egypt, the very planting of the flax seeds which was used to make the linen cloth is depicted. And here we have, if we start from bottom and move to the top, it's presided over by the goddess Aset. Here's her throne, as well as the Neterus, or the spirits, as our brother plants the seeds. It's then harvested and bound, and then taken before the god Tahuti, the great lawgiver. And once his approval is given, our brother takes the solar bark across the skies and into the spiritual realm, where we find his cot, or mummy, wrapped in the linen cloth, the most spiritual act of all. But not only were our ancestors very skilled in the weaving of the linen cloth, but the cotton in an area of the Fayum called Pelusium was of such great quality that Wallace Budge in his book The Dwellers of the Nile said that that was where the French got their word for blouse. But wool, however, was something looked at in contempt, as something worn only by barbarians. And that's why in this ad for wool we see that it's an Anglo fabric, something worn only by barbarians. And here, even we were able to make pleats in ancient times. And this tunic, dating back to the 6th dynastic period, is a pleated garment made over 4,000 years ago. But in Thread magazine today, white folks are still trying to figure out how to sew with pleated fabric. And a designer by the name of Mary McFadden gives up Africa as her source of inspiration. And even the world's oldest surviving dress was found in Tarkhan in Egypt and dates back to 2800 BC. But let's just take a look at some of these garments that were worn. Now here we have our acrobatic dancer sister over 5,000 years ago wearing what we would today know as the loincloth. And Don Luke, in his article on the African presence in the early history of the British Isles and Scandinavia, shows us a Scandinavian figure very closely resembling our acrobatic dancer sister and also wearing the loincloth. Well, out of this loincloth developed what we would today know as the underpants, which can be seen on this terracotta figure from Edfu in Egypt, dating back over 3,000 years ago. But in this painting from Europe, the woman has fallen off the horse here, and nothing's under those clothes, and it does not seem that English women wore drawers before the very end of the 18th century. So while we had them over 3,000 years ago, brothers and sisters, they did not even have the drawers 300 years ago. So long before ballet, long before Vanity Fair, and long before Fruit of the Loom, we had the drawers. So brothers and sisters, the most revolutionary act you can make every morning is stepping into your underpants. And even the slip or petticoat, they tell us in the history of lingerie and pictures that this garment was a natural development from the fine, lightweight linens produced by the artists and craftsmen of the Nile, and was part of the practice of personal cleanliness for which Egypt was famous. So even that, too, came from you. But let's take a look at some of the outer garments. Now here you have the calasiris, or sheath, which is worn here by the goddesses Neith and Selket. Now this tight-fitting garment was called the calasiris, as you can see here. But modern designers would have you believe that they were the ones who created these styles. But once again, that which was once sacred and worn by our goddesses is being copied, and modern designers today are making millions of dollars off of them. And let's take a look at the outer garments here. In the spring preview in Paris, if you take a look at this dress, you'll see it very closely resembles the folded and draped dress worn by Queen Ankhesenamun. Notice the rounded collar, also the gathered waistline, and the sheer see-through appearance of the dress. But Queen Ankhesenamun had her spring preview around the Nile thousands of years before. But this same style of folded and draped dress that Queen Ankhesenamun was wearing, they tell us that this general pattern of dress was to be continued and repeated with variations in ways of folding and draping through subsequent eras, including both the Greek and Roman civilizations. And it persists to this day in many parts of the world, notably in India. Brothers and sisters, we've come to the Temple of Luxor, in ancient times known as the Temple of Waset. And we're in the courtyard of Ramses II, otherwise known as Ursa-Ma'at-Ra Septepen-Ra, of the 19th dynastic period. And with him is his beautiful wife, Queen Nefertari Murray Mut. Her name means most beautiful, loved by Mut. Not like Nefertiti, whose name only means the beautiful one has come. We're talking about Nefertari, the most beautiful one. And not only did she have beauty, but she was a woman with brains too, and ruled with her father, who was the king of Nubia prior to marrying Ramses II. And as we see her next to this gigantic colossus of Ramses II, she looks very small in comparison to the brother. But that was not because the brother thought that he was superior to the sister. It was because his job was to protect the sisters, something that more brothers need to do today. And as we take a look at her garments, you can see that she wears the plumed feathers of Amen, the hidden one, the most universally recognized of the Egyptian gods. And on her crown, it's surrounded by the goddess Wajet, the cobra, the protective goddess of the north. And she's also wearing a folded and draped dress that the Indian sari, the Japanese kimono, and many other garments came from that we see today. This is our queen, Nefertari Murray Mut. In her shenu or cartouche it reads Nefertari Murray Mut. Her name means most beautiful, loved by Mut. And here she has the plumed feathers of Amen, the hidden one, the most universally recognized of the Egyptian gods, as well as the solar disk for Ra to indicate Amen-Ra. And on her head is Mut, the goddess of maternity, where we get the term mother today, because as queen, she was mother of the... Now we wore a variety of headpieces and crowns, and we're just going to get into a few. And here we have the deshret, which is the red crown worn here by King Zoser. It symbolized his dominion in Lower Egypt, or Egypt in the north. But the brother's crown was stolen from him. And just who do you think were the culprits? The Doge. That's dog with an E on the end of it. And these were religious leaders and officials in Venice and Genoa in the 1400s. But religious men wouldn't steal, would they? And certainly not him. But take a look at that hat he's wearing, because it comes directly from the hedge crown worn here by Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynastic period. It symbolized his dominion in Upper Egypt, or Egypt in the south. And here we have a combination crown. This is called the Atef, worn here by the great god Asuru. It's composed of the hedge crown of the south, and it's surrounded by ostrich feathers. Now, the ostrich is a bird indigenous to the African continent. So it's if our ancestors knew that at one day others would try to take Egypt out of Africa, they wanted to give us the signs and symbols so that we would always be able to relocate it. And as Brother Khalid Muhammad told us, the ostrich is a bird that can see around 360 degrees. And as such, the great god Asuru is all-seeing in the spiritual realm. And here we have the Kepresh, which was the war crown, a ceremonial crown worn here by King Tutankhamun. Now, it's colored blue and sprinkled in gold to indicate his dominion over the skies. And in the center, he's got the cobra, showing that he would strike out at his enemies. But this brother's crown, too, was stolen. And the person who took it was named Aleister Crowley. He was an occultist and a magician who formed a sexually oriented cult. And the Southern California branch had as one of his activities to send hate vibrations into Watts in the 1960s, hoping to start a riot. But that which was once sacred and worn by our kings in going to war is now being used to wage war against us. And when we turn the Kepresh to the side, we see that there are little ribbons coming down the back. And in Mary Houston, in ancient Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Persian costume, tells us that 2 ribbons hang down from the back of his helmet, exactly in the manner of those ribbons which are attached to the mitre of a bishop of the Catholic Church. And when we go to the Catholic Church, this is what you see. They're the ribbons, just like we saw from your Kepresh. Something as simple as a ribbon, even that they will never give you credit for, brothers and sisters. And here we have the double crown, which is called the Peshent. Now, the person who wore this crown received the protective powers of the goddess Wajet of the north and Nekbet of the south. Now, while at one time it stood up on the colossus in the temple, it's now on the ground in disrespect. And because it was treated with such disrespect, this Greek thought that he had the right to wear that crown. And everything about his clothing is African, which we'll get into in just a minute. She's even got the crowns on her jacket. As you can see, here's your Peshent, and here's your Deshret. Desecration, once again, brothers and sisters. But this is a brother who would never have allowed this to happen in his day. His name is Usama'at Ra, Septepen Ra, Ramses II. Let's now go live to see the royal attire of our great pharaoh soldier, Ramses II. Okay. Brothers and sisters, we talked about the garments yesterday during the lecture. And here we have the Colossus of Ramses II, and this will give you a good view of the clothing. On his head, we have the nimis, which is the head cloth. Underneath his chin is the postiche, or divine beard. Then wrapped around his waist is called the shindet. You see many of those on the colossus and the statues. Up on top of his head, you see the double crown, which is the Peshent. And the person who wore that crown received the protective powers of the goddess Wajet of the north and Nekbet of the south. In fact, you see the cobra coming out in the center. That means he would strike out at his enemies. But once again, take a look at this picture, because on the double crown, there it is, right there, your Peshent, right on her, they call it the Valley of the King's jacket. You and never giving you credit for anything.